So how long is too long to have a lawnmower? I was contacted by a coworker who said their lawnmower wouldn't start and wanted to see what I could do about it. And what I found out about this mower is going to be quite sobering. You see, this mower is older than some of the cars on the road right now, and just like a car, at some point, you're going to have to let them go. However, the alternative is going to be hard to swallow. That's because money simply doesn't grow on trees. In today's video, we're going to be looking at this Lawn Boy mower, and the problem is that I was told it wouldn't start. Now, most times I take what people tell me with a grain of salt. However, the person who told me this is a longtime friend and a coworker. So when they tell me something has a problem, I typically won't disagree with them, but this time things turn out a bit differently from my other repairs. Now, I'm going to try and repair this mower, but yours might be different, so this might not work on yours. So if things are not working out for you, like in the video, please ask about it. I'll be glad to answer your questions. So when I first got this mower, I did try and start it and confirmed that it would not start, but I also noticed another issue with it. When I was pulling on the rope, it sometimes wanted to get stuck and almost pull back out of my hand. Now there are two possible reasons for it to do this, and one of those reasons is a lot worse than the other one. Now the first reason relates to a sheared flywheel key, which happens when the blade hits something hard. This will effectively advance the ignition timing and cause the spark to happen too soon and cause the engine to stop its rotation. The other reason has to do with the valve lash and it being out of tolerance. Over time, the clearance between the lifter and the top of the valve will change, most times getting too big. And when this happens, it could cause the valves to open later than they should, and if it's bad enough, it could cause the engine to stop its rotation as well. Now, my original plan was to try and start the engine and show you that it wouldn't start. However, things don't always go according to plan, as you're going to see here in just a bit. So it wasn't supposed to start like that. Like I said earlier, I did confirm that it didn't start, but it looks like it somehow fixed itself. Now more than likely, the engine was simply flooded with too much fuel from failed attempts to start it, and after a day or two, all that extra fuel had simply evaporated. Now that we're able to get the engine to start and run, we now have to figure out why the pull rope is having its issues. Of course, if you've seen my videos before, you'll know that I have to give it at least a quick cleaning. And on this one, it's very important that I clean around the car because we'll have to open this part of the engine later on, so I obviously don't want to get any of this dirt inside it. You can also see the carbon fiber patch I put on this mowing deck since the last time it was on this channel. I wish I could have made it look a little bit better around the edges, but this is the best I could do, not having done this kind of work in quite a while. So if you recall, the deck was like Swiss cheese with multiple holes in about 1.5 square feet, so a large patch made a lot more sense than multiple smaller patches. Also, I want the stuff I work on to look better when I give it back to the owners than how it looked when I first got them. And to be honest, it's not that difficult to make that happen because most people never clean their tools and you really can't blame them. Now, what I do is when I get done mowing my yard is to at least blow off any loose grass and dirt. There's no washing unless it's needed. So we're almost done cleaning this mower, and the first thing that I want to check is the flywheel key. Now there is one big way you can tell between this problem and the valve lash problem, and that's if there's gasoline in the engine. The reason why is because if the carb is not working like it should be, the gasoline in the fuel system will not make it to the engine. The reason why the gasoline making it to the engine is important is because if the ignition timing really is off, the fuel will ignite and will stop the engine. Now that can't happen if there is no fuel making it to the engine. That's why the carb has to be working for this test to work out. So if that is the case and there's no fuel in the tank, the fuel lines, or the carb, and the rope still wants to be pulled back out of your hands, chances are that the flywheel key is not going to be damaged and the valve lash is the problem. So unfortunately in this situation, since the fuel system was working correctly, we couldn't exclude the flywheel key as the problem, and that's the reason why we still have to check it. So we finally got down to the flywheel, and besides finding a lot more dirt down here than I was expecting, nothing too exciting has really happened. Now to get the flywheel off the engine, you can either use a 2 or 3 jaw puller, but you can use other methods if you want to. So I'm never going to tell you that you need to buy new tools, but having the right tools does make your job a lot easier. So here's an important tip. If you intend on taking off the flywheel on a Tecumseh engine, remember to tie down the brake handle. That way it'll release the flywheel brake and it won't make contact with it. That way when you try and take off the flywheel, it won't break the shoe from its lever. There's a reason why I know this, and I don't want you to make the same mistake I did. However, you can repair this mistake too. Sorry about the bad angle for that shot. I didn't realize my arm was in the way, but all you missed was the flywheel letting go of the crankshaft. So once the flywheel is off the engine, we'll have to rotate it to get a better look at the key. And it's as plain as day. The key looks exactly like it should and is not damaged in any way. What that means is that the cause for the rope to pull back is related to the valve lash, which is not what we wanted to hear. The reason why is because making changes to the valve lash on this style of engine is very difficult to do. First off, just getting to the valves and lifters is kind of a real pain. But once we get there, you're going to realize why this problem is a real headache to deal with. So the cover we need to get to is behind the intake pipe, which means we've got some work just getting to it. Now the reason why this is such a pain is because we'll have to take the carb off to get access to it. So here is the problem. The more you touch and take off things, the more chances for something to go wrong. And on this carb setup, the linkages and their orientations can greatly affect how the carb works. And if you do get it wrong, it could mean the engine might run at the incorrect speed. Too little speed and you're going to have a tough time cutting the grass, and too much speed could damage the engine. Now to keep that from happening, try taking pictures to help put it back the way it came off. Now I don't have a problem letting you know this, but I've had to use one of my own videos before to help put a carb back on. Simply put, I don't always remember where every part goes, so I don't have an issue taking my own advice. So before you start to take parts off, pull out your phone, take a couple of pics, and you might just save yourself from a huge headache or two. Now on most newer engines, you probably won't have too many issues taking parts off, but on an engine like this one, there are a couple of ways to get it wrong. And yes, in the past, I have done it wrong before, and trying to research how to put it back on correctly was a real pain. So with the intake and the muffler out of the way, we can now finally get to the cover to access the valves and the lifters. Once the cover is gone, what we see is kind of interesting. These are the valve springs capped off by the retainers. Now to measure the clearance between the valves and the lifters, we'll need to rotate the engine so that one of the valves is completely open. After that, we'll then use a feeler gauge to see if the clearance on the closed valve is larger than it's supposed to be. And just as expected, the clearance here is a lot bigger than the 5/1000 feeler I'm using. Now, I am very curious to find out exactly what the clearance is, and surprisingly, it turns out to be about 3 times more than what we would like it to be. That means the clearance on the lower valve is way out of tolerance and will need to be looked at. Next, we're going to rotate the engine so that we can measure the clearance on the other valve. Now, since we know the first one was way out of spec, I'm going to guess that this one is also going to be as well. And it turns out to be very true because the clearance here is almost 5 times more than what it should be. So here's the big question. Now that we know that the clearances are way out of spec, how do we fix it? Well, this is the part where we have to have a long conversation. Now to fix this problem, we can either fix it well enough to get it to work, or we can do it the right way. The partial method is to remove the head to replace the valves with new ones that don't have any wear on them. Then we'll have to grind on the stems so that we can get the clearances that we need. So if that works well enough, then why even bother doing it the other way then? Well, the wear on the valve train extends into the engine. That means we'll need to possibly replace the camshaft as well as the lifters, not to mention if there's any wear to the parts of the block such as the bores for the lifters or the camshaft. Of course, replacing all the parts and the labor involved would be more than this mower is even worth by at least double, so is there even a reason to bother with it? So that is the problem with this repair. Even doing it the partial way with just the valves would cost as much as another used mower, hopefully that doesn't have 20 years of use on it. That means even though this mower has lasted this long, it now has a problem that most mowers never get to experience: old age. So now comes the hard part, trying to decide on what to do about this problem or come up with a more creative solution instead. So after talking to my coworker, they really didn't have an opinion about it. Instead, they left it up to me to decide. That doesn't seem too difficult. However, this choice is not going to be cheap, and now I find myself really unsure of what to do. Now, when something like this happens, I would typically just pretend this mower is my own personal mower and then have to make a choice based on my own personal feelings. And what I came up with is a bit different than what most people would do. My plan is to swap engines with a good donor. Doing it this way would be faster than taking this engine apart and finding new parts. The only problem is finding a good donor, and the other issue is, should I stay with the same engine make or go with something a bit different instead? Like I said, they're leaving it up to me, and personally I would want to stay with a Tecumseh engine just to keep it as original as possible. However, parts for this engine are getting harder to find without using another mower for parts. That means if I want this to be something easy to work on, I should go with a newer Briggs engine because finding parts for it would be a whole lot easier than even a Briggs flathead. Now in the meantime, this mower can still be used, however you have to remember to pull the rope to find the compression stroke before pulling on it. Otherwise, if you don't, the rope will be yanked back out of your hands, making for a very painful start to your mowing. Now I kind of wanted my coworker to make this choice for me, but they felt as though they didn't know enough to make an informed decision, and I can't blame them either. So my question is, should we even bother trying to deal with this problem, or should we just keep using it the way that it is and just make do until one day this mower stops working? I hate to say it, sometimes the best choice is to not do anything at all. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.